history of human civilization. One of the things that's misunderstood, at least by my 19-year-old students at Chapel Hill, is that when we're reading the Bible, we're not actually reading the words of Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John. We're reading translations from the Greek language in which these books were written. And something is always lost in translation. And not only that, but we're not reading translations of the originals of these books, because we don't have the originals of these books or of any of the other books of the New Testament. What we have are copies made centuries later, many of them many centuries later. These thousands of copies that we have are all different from one another in lots of little ways and sometimes in big ways. There are places where we don't know what the authors of the New Testament originally wrote. Now, for some Christians, that's not a problem because they don't have a high view of Scripture. For others, it's a very big problem. What does it mean to say that God inspired the words of the text if we don't have the words? Moreover, why should one think that God performed the miracle of inspiring the words of the Bible if he didn't perform the miracle of preserving the words of the Bible? If he meant to give us his very words, why didn't he make sure we received them? The New Testament were all written in Greek. They were all written in the first century of the Common Era. They were written by Greek-speaking Christians who wanted to share with their community their views of Jesus, of the faith, of what to believe and how to behave. So an author like Mark, the author of our first gospel, sat down and wrote out one day his gospel about Jesus. Now, we don't know where Mark actually lived. Some scholars have thought that Mark maybe lived in Rome. So let's say he lived in Rome. Mark writes his book. Well, how does this book get into circulation? The problem is we're dealing with an age in which there were no Xerox machines. There wasn't desktop publishing yet. No PDF files. In fact, there wasn't carbon paper. How did people get copies of books? Well, in the ancient world, the only way to get a copy of a book was to copy it by hand. One page, one sentence, one word, one letter at a time. Mark makes his book, and somebody in his community wants another copy of it. And so that person either makes a copy himself or has somebody else make a copy for him. Now, part of the problem is that in the ancient world, at this time period in the Roman Empire, probably something like 90% of the population was illiterate.
It was difficult. I mean, if you're raised in the Christian tradition, this forms the very heart and soul of who you are, and leaving it means leaving friends. It means alienating family. It means losing out on all sorts of social networks that you have and all sorts of beliefs that you've held dear. And so it's very difficult and traumatic emotionally. But my view at the time was that I was in a search for what is true, and I came to believe it simply isn't true that the Bible's without error, and the idea that Jesus is God is an idea that was developed historically over time among Christians. It wasn't something that was original to Christianity. It's a later historical development. So too the doctrine of the Trinity, and these various ideas that I had held on to, I started to realize were historical formulations, and just the existence of God Himself. I finally came to realize that for me, it simply didn't make sense anymore.